Today I'm just gonna talk about the one part of my MD Res, which is the development of a psychedelic compassion scale. This scale so essentially I'm working with James Rucker, who's doing he's got funding from NIHR to do a randomized control trial with the primary outcome to see if psilocybin with psychological support is different from placebo. And my MD Res is kind of looking at the kind of secondary outcomes and looking at the kind of context around that. And one thing I'm doing is developing a psychedelic compassion scale. And this is in order to sort of be used in the future as a predictor for response for psilocybin for depression. So in order to, when you sort of, what I'm going to present now is that I've done the first sort of part of development. And this involves the sort of identification of the domain of the scale. So what are the experiences that psilocybin gives that actually seem to be associated with improvements in depression? And then the item generation, those are all the creating the questions for those for the scale, and then content validity, and also I've done some pre-testing of questions. So what do I think is the kind of important domain for kind of experiences which seem to improve depression in psilocybin when people take psilocybin? I worked as a psychiatrist in the Imperial study about 5 years ago, where we gave psilocybin to people with treatment-resistant depression. And I did qualitative research there. But during that study, I was really struck by how many of the participants talked about experiencing some kind of compassion, either towards themselves or perhaps with others. So it got me thinking that actually would kind of compassion, as already defined, be a good way of thinking about or quantifying the experiences that are important. There's a researcher called Kristen Neff who has defined compassion as self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness is having a kind relationship with oneself. Common humanity is the idea that you know that you don't suffer alone, that everybody suffers. And mindfulness is the idea of having a non-judgmental, curious attention towards one's feelings, thoughts, or bodily sensations. So I'm just going to give you, so in kind of thinking about the domain and the kind of conceptualization of this, you can use both deductive and inductive processes. So that's deductive being kind of doing a literature review. So this would be thinking about the compassion literature, as well as the existing literature that there is, and what are the psychological mechanisms of change within a psilocybin experience. And then deductive, so that would be like bottom up. So what do people actually say about their experience? So this is from the qualitative research that I did at Imperial. And so this is a quote now from someone in the Imperial study, if you want to read it. So a feeling of compassion towards oneself. Then common humanity, here's an example of that. I think Kristen Neff even talks about the idea of being in the same boat. And someone even just came up with this. And then an example of mindfulness. There was this huge, terrifying creature with a rifle, and instead of running away, I looked at it, and it wasn't as scary as it seemed. My fear subsided. It suddenly seemed ridiculous. I started laughing. If I had avoided it, it would have got more terrifying. So kind of having done that, I realized that perhaps the psychedelic experiences or psilocybin experiences that people were having were slightly broader and slightly different to these these definitions of compassion. And so I've renamed them so the self-kindness I renamed inner therapist, because people were also having experiences where they felt like their kind of inner therapist was activated in a way that's kind of different to just sort of suddenly having a kind of relationship with oneself. And then common humanity was broader in that not only did people feel connected with other people, they also felt kind of connected with the world, with the universe, with nature, the kind of much broader sense of connection. And then relating to mindfulness, this also seemed broader as well, because people appeared to have not only, well, not so much a focused kind of awareness of some particular sensation, but more sometimes very intense feelings, which could either be like a roller coaster or just a kind of very intense feeling of bliss, or perhaps a kind of intense catharsis, a sense of kind of everything kind of coming out. So those are my three kind of components of the scale. So then I had to sort of generate different items for these components. So at first I generated about 5 questions for each component, and I actually made positive and negative questions in order to get rid of any bias that someone might have when they're answering it. And I then sent that out to previous participants of the of psilocybin trials, and a participant who was on our NIHR steering committee, and basically, as well as colleagues, and everyone said that the negative questions were just too complicated and repetitive. So I got rid of those. And so then I was left with 15 questions. So then with those 15 questions, I did what's called the content validity. So I sent the questions out to experts around the world in psilocybin research. And I asked them to say which item did they think fit into which component. And also then when I then told them to turn the page, and they had to rate how much they agreed with the component that I had put the item with. So then I got a content validity index, as well as something called a Fleiss Kappa. My content, essentially the Fleiss Kappa is a calculation that tells you what the agreement is amongst all these experts on what you're saying, but at the same time that takes into account the chance of that agreement. So it's kind of better than just a content validity, just an inter-rater agreement. With the 15 questions, it was 0.64, which is kind of okay, but not that great. And actually, when I took away 3 of the questions, which did, looking back at them, were quite sort of ambiguous, I then was left with a Fleiss Kappa of 0.78, which is kind of very good to nearly excellent. And so these now are the questions that I'm left with. So within Inner Therapist, I've got these 4 questions. I discovered new insights about myself. I had new insights about, how to live healthily. I've missed that out. My inner wisdom or inner therapist was activated. I discovered an innate self-worth. And then connection, I experienced feelings of love and or connection with others. I felt a connection with the world of universe. I felt a connection with something greater than myself. My consciousness expanded outside my own mind. And emotional experiencing, I experienced negative emotions, for example, anger, sadness, despair, transforming into positive ones. For example, bliss, ecstasy, peace, humor. I felt a roller coaster of different emotions. I experienced emotions and or memories that I had previously been avoiding either consciously or unconsciously. And I felt very intense emotions. So the next stage is to give this pilot questionnaire to the participants on our NIHR randomized control trial that hopefully will be starting soon, although it's still going through some of the processes before starting. And what I didn't say is that on the scale, they're answering on a Likert scale. So from I strongly disagree to I strongly agree, from 1 to 5, which is something that I changed with the feedback from participants as well, because previously that wording had also been a little bit confusing. So yeah, that's as far as I've got with that bit. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I probably missed out some important things, so please ask me if there's anything that was confusing. Thank you for listening.